This morning, I want to talk about white privilege. I doubt that there are phrases that are much more difficult for many white people to embrace than white privilege. But a conversation about it is long overdue. It's defined by the scholar who first wrote about it as an invisible package of unearned assets that white people can count on cashing in each day. The first time I encountered it, I was offended. How could I be privileged, I thought. I'm not part of the 1%. I'm not a Kennedy or a Rockefeller, and I'm certainly not a tech millionaire. This doesn't apply to me. But as I read the 26 examples of the author identified as unearned assets, I began to understand that I was wrong. Now, here are just 3 things from this list. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area that I can afford and in which I want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such location will be neutral or even pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. The list goes on, and thanks to social media, includes such things as going for a run without being assumed to be a criminal, going bird watching without being reported as a threat, and sleeping in the safety of one's own home. Notice what this list does and does not include. There's nothing on this list that includes things that we might typically see as privilege. No vast personal wealth, no high political office, no luxury cars or mansions. The list simply enumerates some of the activities of a normal life that should be available to all Americans, regardless of race, religion, or national origin. As I see it, one tragedy of white privilege is that it keeps white Americans from seeing the ongoing impact of racism and discrimination on our sisters and brothers of color, especially the discrimination that took place years ago and is no longer legal. White privilege is a bubble in which one part of the American family lives. It allows white people to insulate themselves from injustice and the pain of discrimination. The events of the past few weeks have brought into sharp focus the difference in the ways in which communities of color and white communities relate to and are treated by the police. People across the country have been shocked and angered and grieved. As tragic and as upsetting as these events have been, they are only the most visible sign of dysfunction in race relations in America. But we as a people will not successfully address the issues until all our hearts are open and our minds ready to understand the experiences of others. We're at a moment in which the potential for change and growth seems possible. Public opinion research suggests that there's been a remarkable shift on a number of issues just in the last month. 76% of Americans say that racial discrimination is a big problem in the United States, a 26% increase from 2015. 74% of Americans say they support the protests that have taken place since George Floyd's killing. Compare that to just 2 years ago, when only 40% of Americans said that they supported the Black Lives Matter movement. Even opinions about police are changing. In 2014, 33% of Americans said that police officers are more likely to use excessive force if the suspect is Black. In 2020, 57% of Americans feel that way. Right now, legislative efforts are focused on reform in policing. But racial injustice extends far beyond the relationships between communities of color and the police. As Father Justin discussed last Sunday, the impact of the discriminatory practices that may have ended 10 or 15 or even 40 years ago persist. Now, I think it would be a mistake for us to underestimate the difficulty of making the changes we need to make. It is one thing to feel righteous anger about events that take place across the country from us. Confronting injustice in our own neighborhoods is quite another. I am reminded that when Dr. King died in 1968, he had a public disapproval rating of almost 75%. The public was behind him when he confronted the brutality of Jim Crow South, but not when he tried to persuade his brothers and sisters outside of the South to share the white neighborhoods and white places of employment with Black people. For those of us who are white, our first task should be to examine our white privilege and talk candidly about race and discrimination. I think today's gospel can prepare us for what lies ahead. Jesus sends his disciples out to minister to the people with a very large assignment: to cure every disease, every sickness. And he's candid about the difficulties they'll face. I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. But don't worry about what to say. The Spirit of the Father will supply the right words to you. For us to cure the sickness of racism and the illness of discrimination, we must step into the midst of the wolves, even if those wolves are in the dark corners of our own hearts. Confronting injustice and inequity is never easy, but the Spirit of the Father will give us the words we need. And as always, we must never forget that we are all created in the image of a loving God who is always with us. Knowing that, I look forward to talking more about racial injustice. And I especially look forward to the day that the phrase white privilege disappears from our vocabulary, and what we call white privilege now will be human privilege, the lived experience of all Americans.